We're here. Welcome everybody to the first Charter Review Committee meeting of 2026. It seems like it's been forever. I was just looking at the notes. We last met on December 3rd, and that just seems like an eternity ago. But time has flown. We had a good end of 2025, and 2026 is kicking off real good like. We have with us, just for posterity here, we have our Vice Chair, Councilman Bullock. We have Mr. Jack Blanchard, member of the committee here. We have our Council President who formed this wonderful committee for us. Thank you, Mr. President, for joining us today. We have a bunch of other folks here some of whom come in alternating with others, their counterparts from various places, DLR, law, Comptroller's office, Mayor's office. We have kind of a loose agenda, I think, for today. I think we want to cover a couple of things. One, Councilwoman Ramos, how are you doing? Yeah. Is Councilman Jones out? Okay. In the previous meetings, so we've had, 3 meetings now. We had in the first one, we kind of did like a brief, 1-minute overview of a bunch of topics that had already been kind of thrown on the table. And then we started in our second meeting kind of going through and discussing them in greater depth and noting any additional topics that were brought up through our email collection, of which I believe we have one more today. So we'll touch on that at the outset, just to note it has come in. We went through all of the topics, though, I think, and kind of got a sense of our general take on them, whether they're charter material, not charter material, whether they're kind of ready for prime time or not, whether they are pressing as something that we want to take up necessarily for the 2026 election versus something that can and maybe is better to wait for the 2028 election. And then we talked about kind of is this something that not different from being ready for prime time? Are the details kind of there enough that we can meaningfully work with it, but rather is there any political path forward for this thing? And so I think having kind of discussed each of the topics, I think, and how many of them relate to one another, I think a good next step here would be for us to do a kind of a recap to understand, make sure we have a collective sense of basic standing of each of the topics and how they may relate to others and how we can incorporate them into a recommendation. Before we do that, I want to give the council president a few minutes to talk about the upcoming outreach effort that we have here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee members, to the staff that's here. To start on a somber note, I mentioned to my colleagues, but just for everyone to be aware, Councilman Reisinger passed away last night. He was an extraordinary member of this council. 3 of us got to serve with him, and he was about as good and honest of a public servant as you can find. He was part of that class that Mary Pat, Ricky, you would see Sharon Green Middleton, Ed, all those folks had their sort of wing of the council. And he was just a pretty extraordinary human being. And I know those of us that were lucky enough to serve with him are all going to miss him a lot. Just a decent human, and someone who gave a lot to Baltimore. So wanted to start on that note, and more in terms of his funeral and all the rest will be coming out soon. I'm gonna send you all an email about it, but would not be right to not start by acknowledging Councilman Ed Reisinger. Onto the charter committee, I want to just first appreciate, I know a lot of hard work has gone into this endeavor. I want to thank the chair, all 5 colleagues, staff that's been pouring into this. Really appreciate it. I think it's important to me and to, I think, all of us that we're building the best structure for our government that we can possibly get. I know we've had past charter commissions and there's been some great ideas that have come out of them. But what I really appreciate about this committee is the action that I see us taking, and the thoughtfulness and deliberativeness that the chair and all the colleagues, the vice chair, have put into it. Equally important is the community engagement piece. We know that at the end of the day, the charter is the people's document. It is anything that we change in this room is going to go through the people. And so it's critically important to me, and I think to all of us, that we do an earnest, honest listening and engagement with folks out in community, that we are sharing and spreading both the ideas that we generate, but also hearing from our constituents. In your hands is a 1-pager developed by my staff to promote the 5 community input sessions that will take place around the city in February and March. The sessions all begin at 6 p.m. and will take place as follows. On February 26th, we're going to be at Enoch Pratt at Herring Run. On March 3rd, Edmondson West Side. March 5th, Coppin State. March 11th, site pending somewhere in Northwest Baltimore. March 16th, Freedom Temple Church. I ask that when folks are out in community associations or meeting with constituents, that please pass out these 1-pagers. Please let folks know that this is taking place. Our goal is to drive some turnout at these listening sessions. So please make sure to be doing that, and to also message that people can send testimony or ideas to testimony@baltimorecity.gov. I'm also asking by the end of February, that we each come up with 10 leaders from our districts to invite to a listening session. I'm asking that committee members attend at least one of the community listening sessions, ideally more than that, and that you notify the chair of when you're going to come. And again, I want to thank everybody for the really thoughtful efforts. The one other thing I do want to lift up is at the very beginning of the term, there was a conversation between myself, the mayor, and the comptroller about engaging the National League of Cities in thinking about the charter and specifically the Board of Estimates. The idea being to avoid some of the political power fight that invariably would come and leverage one of our trusted partners. That effort took a long time to get stood up, but the NLC is working on providing some options for us to consider, looking at best practices, looking at different cities across the country that are similarly sized, that are similar to Baltimore. So I wanted to give you all a heads up. It's my expectation that within the next 4 to 6 weeks, they'll be able to present something. I asked that they present not only to myself, the mayor, and the comptroller, but to this committee as well. And I think there's somewhat of a short-term and a long-term conversation to be had. I know there's thoughts on composition of the Board of Estimates. And then there's sort of a longer conversation that the city administrator and others want to have about potentially reshaping our city government in some pretty fundamental ways, thinking about, do we even need a Board of Estimates? Could contracts like they do in most every other city, other than I think like 2 others that still have BOEs, go through the city council if you reached a certain financial threshold? Obviously, that is something that we would not want to do before the next ballot before it needs to be on the next ballot, that would have profound ramifications for a whole bunch of other things. And if you move one puzzle piece, the rest of the puzzle would have to get moved too. But I did just want to put that on everyone's radar, that NLC is working on coming up with some options and looking at, reality is that most cities don't have a board of estimates. So does it behoove Baltimore to move off of the BOE? I think there is widespread agreement, even among all of the members of the Board of Estimates, that our current system is antiquated and needs to be reformed and or abolished. And so I think the question is getting to the right amalgam for Baltimore. With that, appreciate the time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, there's a lot of what we've discussed is intertwined in one way or another, to one degree or another, with the composition of the Board of Estimates, with its duties. It's sort of an albatross within the charter. Mr. Vice Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. One point around the Board of Estimates, I'm thinking about the conversation that we had first had, and I know one of the thoughts or one of the things you had heard, Councilman Ramos, is about the impact on the bond rating. So I did have a conversation with CAO Leach, and with the point is that anytime you make any changes to city government structure, they will look at your bond rating. So not that changing the structure, not that going from 5 to 3 would necessarily lower it, but anytime you tinker with any form of government, they'll take a look at it.
Yeah, fair. Also wanted to note that Councilwoman first I'll note, thank you to our staff person, Ethan, for putting together these binders with everybody. I think kind of having covered all of the topics that folks have brought up and just discussed them and put them all out in the open and had our initial discussion about them. We're really at a point where we have to start to look at what do changes to the charter really actually look like. And I wanted to make sure that everybody had a practical means to just pull up the charter without having to sit at a computer and scroll and things like that. So I asked Ethan to put together these binders for all the committee members that have a printed copy of the charter in them. I also asked him to include in it a couple of other things. You have the Vic Tervola document. You should have a copy of that in there. And I asked him to make copies. We have copies, I think, of the document that Councilman Ramos circulated last night about the capital budget. I don't know what I did with mine. It's here somewhere right in front of me. I think it's in my other folder. I've got multiple folders. I don't know. So we've got a bunch of stuff here to try to make this next phase of our work a little more straightforward. It's this document right in front of me. I think let's touch on the one topic that did come in from the email, just so, because, our practice here has been to just note anything new at the beginning of the meetings in much the way that we did in our very first meeting. Just give it its 1 minute kind of so that we heard what it was.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So very broadly, the submission relates to the governance and administration of the Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund. And I'll provide more details on that submission in the bill file. I'll be sure to upload the documents that were shared with us.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's already a bill in the city council pertaining to certain things about the Children and Youth Fund, but which is established in the charter. So there is maybe something somebody conceivably wants, to propose for charter change there. We have had a bunch of discussion about funds in general here. And so as we talk more about the budget and how to structure changes, whatever proposed changes we might have here, our general powers related to special funds, I think, are, kind of at the forefront of some of this conversation. So the vice chair and I got together shortly after our last meeting, and we ran through the topics to kind of just check against one another to make sure we had the same basic read on what our outcomes had been from the several meetings prior. But I do think it would be a good idea for us to kind of recap this because I think that that's how we start to draw the lines between certain of these recommendations and say this where they can fit into like a proposal, because I don't think that we are going after, like, you know, if we have 26 topics here and you know, we determined that 20 of them are even charter material. I don't think that we're looking for 20 different charter amendments. I think we're looking for a much smaller number of actual amendment proposals that incorporate multiple of these recommendations into each of several proposals. Before I do that, we also circulated some notes from the finance director on the purpose and makeup of the Board of Finance. We sent that around a couple of weeks ago, so that was some other information that came in. I want to also go to Jeff Hochstetler from the Law Department to just touch on. Jeff, did we have things that we asked for law clarification on that you've done some preparation on that you want to share with us?
Most of the topics that have come up in previous meetings, I think I've touched on individually in either follow-up meetings with you or a couple of other members. Haven't put anything together for the good of the committee, but can certainly get together with Ethan or you afterwards, and we can formalize that.
Okay. The one thing that I think is an overarching concern for me, and I'm going to refer to the Tervala document as a good way of kind of succinctly putting this. Again, to remind folks, the Tervala document looks at principles and constraints governing charter revisions and really looks at like what is and is not appropriate charter material conceptually, legally, from a case law perspective and such. And then before going into, now let's look at the city charter and see what in here is not really appropriate to be in the charter and why, and what we think, you know, what is recommended that to be done about any individual provision. Part 2 of the Tervala documents is problems with applying the guidelines to the current city charter. The application of these principles to the Baltimore City Charter is problematic because the city charter, for various reasons, is stuffed with administrative and legislative or regulatory subject matter. Deleting some of the material will be disruptive for 3 reasons. 1, the deletion of legislative subject matter may require, at least in some cases, the actual adoption of legislation to replace the deleted charter material. The politics involved in adopting new legislation, to say nothing of the resources and time involved, can act as a serious obstacle confronting their deletion. 2, the entire operation of city administration revolves around the administrative material contained in the current city charter. In many cases, deleting it will cause anxiety and confusion in public managers, even if the absence of these provisions would not prevent a department from continuing to operate as it always has done. And 3, certain interest groups have arisen around and strongly adhere to certain provisions that may, under a strict application of the law, be deemed improper charter material. This fact will serve as a serious obstacle confronting their deletion. It's really the second one of these points that is sort of at the forefront of my mind when I'm starting to when I try to think practically step by step what happens here, or realistically what happens as we consider any sort of sweeping changes to the charter, any substantial changes. Again, the entire operation of city administration revolves around the administrative material contained in the current charter. That is administrative material that is essentially inappropriate to be in the charter. And so the idea of deleting it, in many cases, deleting it will cause anxiety and confusion in public managers. And I'm looking for a way for us to do what is right, to take things from the charter that should not be in the charter, and for us to sort of pad like a runway of this change in some way. And so one of the thing that I asked Jeff was about the way, whether it would be possible for us to craft a transition provision that basically anticipates this anxiety and confusion about change, where even in the absence of the provisions we would delete, it would not prevent a department from just continuing to operate in the way. It's not essential that it be in the charter in order for an agency or department to continue to work.
And if I may briefly, Chair, on that point, transition provisions are certainly fine. And I think as we discussed, as long as the provisions themselves aren't somehow itself creating new legislation in the charter, but, effective dates, transition dates. I mean, our current charter even has some of that transition from the previous iteration. So there are ways to craft that.
The specific kind of approach that I think I've talked about this before is like, on the one hand, the easiest thing to do would be to, before we do anything with the charter, pass ordinances that say this ordinance takes effect upon whatever date this other change happens in the charter. But what if the charter doesn't get changed? What if a charter amendment change doesn't pass out of City Hall? What if it doesn't, never make it onto the ballot? What if it fails at the ballot? Like, then we have undertaken this legislative process that never comes to be anything. And we've used a lot of administrative time to do it, a lot of public time, a lot of everybody's time and resources to make it happen. And so in order to not do that, the other way, the opposite approach, I guess, would be to say, we're making this change to the charter. There's a provision in the charter amendment that would go before the public, and say, look, if you vote for this change is going to happen. But the way things are in the charter now and the way things work now will continue to work exactly the way as they work right now until such a time that either the city council adopts an ordinance to kind of address the substance of this need for legislative, operational language, administrative language, whatever, or a regulation is adopted by the relevant agency, something, so the existing way of doing things per the charter continues on until it's replaced, or affirmatively just said, we don't need anything like this anywhere written. And we're just saying, we're passing some sort of measure that says that, right? So until we take action or the next general election happens. So we're essentially giving ourselves a 2-year runway. So the voters pass about a charter measure at the ballot, and the existing way continues to prevail until the next general election, unless we actually do something about it legislatively in the interim. Does that seem like that's going to be a legally salient way of transitioning? Is the biggest question that I want to make sure I understand.
I'll say this: nothing that we run into so far would prevent something like that. I mean, clearly the details will be in the wording, looking at the dates, but I think that we can work with something like that.
Okay. Just general sense from our committee members here, does this seem like a reasonable kind of approach?
Mr. Chair, I think I think it makes sense, but I also know that a lot of times the public wants to know if we're planning on taking this out, what are we planning on doing? And so if we did the legislation first, then there would be that public discussion, legislative discussion about what it is and why we need to remove X, Y, and Z from the charter. So that would be the only benefit I see from doing the legislative exercise first, and then saying at the end that's enacted if, you know, resolution XYZ gets, you know, passed at the ballot or the charter gets changed or something like that. Because I think it's important that, just as you said, on some of these things, that it's important that the public understands, like, what are we doing? And that this is, once we pass this legislation, that's why this thing has to be taken out of the charter.
Let me just ask a follow-up here. My sense is that, like, even within that kind of general outlook, there are probably cases where it matters more or matters less, right? I mean,
I would guess, like, if we're taking all of the agencies out, just as a for instance, and then we have to do different pieces of legislation for every agency. Again, just a for instance, I haven't delved deep into this. Some operations of the agencies that we would put in code would be something that people would be interested in and others wouldn't, right? But I just think that's the nature of legislation. The Board of Estimates elimination, and then how we proceed with our budgeting, you know, in that, you know, would be of immense interest to the public, I think. But without having an alternative, and we just put a ballot initiative in without an alternative, I think that there's not confidence, first of all, from whoever's looking at us, but second of all, from the public understanding, like, how we're doing this and why, in terms of the mechanisms of how we run government.
okay.
Mr. Chair, to clarify, most of what we're referring to with these, like, conditional implementation as legislation or whatever, would be in the situations where we're removing something from the city charters. So basically moving it from the charter to the code.
I would
that's
think
the
that-
most
yeah,
high.
I thought I could pull up just
It's not in every case, like,
yeah.
it's not that, but
Sure.
like in.
Sure,
like,
yeah,
the
but if-
example of, like, the Board of Estimates or the agencies, then yeah.
Yeah, in the case where you're putting something from the charter and code, I mean, I think it's, I agree with my colleague that it's a good, just sort of like the public trust that we've got kind of all of our stuff in one bag, that we've got it set up that if this passes, you know, if this ballot measure passes, then this gets implemented or whatever. But then the second piece of that would be the shucks, what was I going to say? It eludes me. But anyway, I think it's a good. I think it's a good idea to do it on the to have the the legislation would probably be pretty easy to do if we're mostly just moving it from the charter to the code, right? Like, it's most likely going to look similar to what's in the charter. Like, it's not going to be some immensely complex drafting procedure, I would think.
So I think that's the case in most, in like the agencies, but I think in.
Roz is laughing at me.
But in the case of, like, the Board of Estimates, like, we have to redo the entire budget process. And that kind
I
of
mean,
thing. Yeah.
there's definitely situations where, like, we will clearly need to know what is being done with the thing being removed. But I mean, I think mostly what we're talking about is this needs to get moved from the charter to the code so that we have more flexibility in the future or whatever. Like,
Yeah,
I think that's mostly
I
what we're
think
talking
for me, like, the things that stick out are, like, Article 7, Subtitle 30. I'm just picking kind of a random one here. Department of Public Works, supervision of public works. The director shall supervise all public works in Baltimore City or elsewhere made by or for the city or any municipal agency that relate to the department's powers under this charter. All plans and specifications for these public works, including those involving engineering questions, shall be submitted to the director for approval. Like there were two sentences. There was a period in there. It's, you know, I'm expedient. Yeah, if the charter says that there is a Department of Public Works and that it has a head who is a person that is nominated and confirmed and whose salary shall be provided for in the annual ordinance of estimates, and that they shall have a deputy director who shall serve in their absence. Like, who is wondering, like, whether or not the supervision of public works falls under the department and head of the Department of Public Works, and if that really needs to be stated in the charter, or even as a matter of fact needs to be stated in the code. And so to restate things in the code, did I hit this button? Why is this? Did I? I don't know what happened.
All of ours are gone.
One seems to be rocking. Oh, there you go.
The council president stays rocking. I think there are a lot of cases here where, like, actually we might not need to restate anything in the code. And I think at a couple points in the Tervala document, he says, like, if this was deleted from the charter, and I don't remember exactly where it was, I read this like a week or so ago. If this particular provision was deleted from the charter, probably no member of the public would miss it or like be aware of it missing. And that's probably a good measure of whether or not something should be in the charter. And I think equally raises the question of, like, does it actually have to be in code because it's so implicit in the existence of an agency that if you're going to have a Department of Transportation, then transportation stuff is under the supervision of the director of the Department of Transportation, and that the more flexibility there is about that, perhaps better.
Quick clarifying question, Mr. Chair. So is the goal here to clean up the code and clean up the charter, or is it to enable the council to legislate more proficiently over agencies, or both?
They're one and the same. I mean, I think that, yeah, they go hand in hand. Like, there's a bunch of stuff
That we are prohibited from.
Anything that you say or could that the charter says that could be construed as meaning that, like, anything in this big nebulous sphere of authority is in the hands of this agency head could be construed as saying the city council actually has no power whatsoever to make any law that pertains to anything in that sphere. And we've run into this on a number of occasions.
I don't know how we're going to handle this new microphone thing, but thank you. That we actually already have a lot in the code about each agency, right? So there may be, as we look through the code, if we're looking at taking out some of the stuff about the agencies, it's already there's some stuff already in the code. So it's redundant anyway, or that we just add a little bit to what's already there. So it's not always a rethinking, but there are very specific things that we've discussed, like the Board the Board of Finance and the Board of Estimates, potentially capital budget, potentially, the term limits term limits is separate, that we would have to redesign completely in code. So I think the Tervala document has been very helpful in terms of guidance. But that also we've already done a lot of this. It just happened to be that way. And so procurement is another one. So procurement is definitely a transformational one. There's so much that's in the charter on procurement. And the recommendation is to just take that all, create an ordinance that outlines how we're going to do procurement. So that one would have to be created, but the others might just need to be tweaked, within the confines of what we've already done, just because we've already done it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like at least it came up once before. brought up the topic of like how transition could work. I think we've got, I know I had a conversation with Jeff about this a couple of weeks ago. And so I know he has thought about it and talked with his colleagues in law. And I'm satisfied with the response that there's nothing saying that we really couldn't use this method of transition that I kind of generally outlined. Which I think is going to be like again, give some ease and comfort to some who might otherwise be really nerve-wracked. And so that's a good frame, just a good point of reference for how we think about things going forward. I want to come back to this idea. I just want to go back through all these topics one more time and get a sense of how we're considering them in general and interrelated to one another. So the first one here was the Board of Estimates. The Council President has already talked about the composition of the Board of Estimates, and I think we're all very aware of the challenge, the heightened temperature that comes with talking about the structure of the Board of Estimates. So I think none of us knows what we're going to do about that right now. Tyler, how you doing? We heard from the finance director about the Board of Finance composition. I also want to note that I looked at the Tervala document on this one. This is actually the one that I just referenced a minute ago. The absence of this board in the charter likely will go unnoticed by any voter, which is why it should be deleted from the charter. The board is purely a creature of internal operations. What the finance director's 2 or 3 page response to us, it was very good. Amounted to, however, was just basically, these are people who know about investment, and they just advise us on investment and make decisions about advising us on how to invest. And I don't see any reason why that it has to be a board, and or at least one that is specified in the charter. It's something that would much more easily be overseen in a legislative capacity, or adapted through legislation, altered through legislation if it weren't in the charter, if it's necessary at all. Yeah, Councilman Blanchard. Oh boy.
Yeah. I kind of didn't even want to bring it up, but so the Board of Finance just came up in a meeting I had with the Comptroller's Office and Finance or Law a couple days ago about TIF districts, and looking through that report that they had and whatnot. I think the only argument for keeping it would be if there's some real chance that being in the code and not in the charter then makes like the people who put the bonds together and sell bonds feel less confident that like this is going to be a stable investment. And so it, makes it it's more possible that like it's subject to the volatility of council members, whatnot. All that to say that just having had a conversation about TIFs and the Board of Finance and whatnot, that's the only thing I would flag as a consideration there.
Yeah, I think it is. Man, this microphone situation. I think I'll just note that like every time I hear like if it's in the charter, it means something more. than if it's just in code. That to me, it means really like the people who are day-to-day running the city respect one more than they respect the other, when I think the expectation should be that, like, if we make laws in this city, they should be upheld, and that, like, we don't take lightly the making of laws, and they go through a pretty rigorous legislative process. And when something like this is, I think, essentially, like Vic says, essentially internal operations of the department, it doesn't really make sense that it needs to be in the charter. I don't give a whole lot of credence to the idea that it might be looked upon as like a lesser entity if it weren't in the charter, I guess is what I'm saying. Okay. So that's Board of Finance. We have this letter saying, here's what it does. But we also have this thing saying, yeah, okay, well, it can do that. It just doesn't belong in the charter. And it comes in the executive department section, Article 7 of the charter. And so I'll come back to that as something of a broader discussion. We talked about parking benefits districts, which led us to a bigger conversation about funds and budgetary authority in general. And so looking at the way, so now we've got this nicely bound copy of the charter. If I can ask everybody on the committee to turn in the charter to page 157. 157 is the beginning of the Board of Estimates article. Okay. No. We've already. Okay. Okay. So, okay, if you start on page 157, I'm just going to look in broad strokes here. Titles 1 and 2 pertain to essentially the existence of the Board of Estimates. Title 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, oh. Good. Okay, we figured it out. Thank you, Ethan. You're welcome. There's a button on here that says exclusive that was pressed on the screen that made it so that no other could be turned on.
Was that like a prompt?
I guess so. Oh, I want that one.
So you could shut one of us up with me. That's not fair.
I like that. It says seat 1 on it. Okay. Yeah, so 3 through 10 are budget process and budget execution. And if we think generally, the budget is not exclusively a Board of Estimates animal, right? It's a thing that starts with the finance department helping with the preparation of the mayor's proposed budget, that budget coming to the Board of Estimates, and the Board of Estimates making a recommendation of a budget to the city council voting on that budget, and then the mayor having a pass veto, line item veto authority on it. So it's really an animal that passes through many hands. It's not exclusively a Board of Estimates thing. And so it doesn't really seem to make sense that the budget process is spelled out in the Board of Estimates article. And then we go on to 11 and we have all of this very prescriptive stuff about procurement process that takes up 4.5 pages. And then 12 is about salary and wage scales and work conditions that is really legislative. And then 13 through 18 are things that are duplicative of state law or redundant of things. I mean, even number 13, command appearance of municipal officers. The board shall have power at any time to summon before it the heads of departments and their respective bureaus and divisions, all municipal officers and members of commissions and boards. If you turn back just a few pages to the beginning of Article 6, under powers and duties of the Board of Estimates, it already says the Board of Estimates shall formulate and execute the fiscal policy of the city to an extent and in the manner provided for in the charter. To exercise its powers and perform its duties, the board may promulgate rules and regulations and summon before it the heads of departments, bureaus, divisions, municipal officers. And so 13 is duplicative of something that came just a few pages before. And Vic Tervala notes each one by one, 13 through 18, why these things don't need to be in here. And so when I'm looking at these things about the budget and funds and such in general, what I believe needs to happen here to put things more in their right place and to make more sense of the charter in general is to take away the things that don't need to be there and put the budget process not under the Board of Estimates because it's not exclusively theirs, but something that is just budget. And so in looking at this list, that the many other things that we have to go through in this list to kind of recap things, I think anytime we're looking at something that pertains to the budget, it's got to be in a new article that's just a budget article. We put it there, and then any changes we need to make or want to make to the budget process, that's all there in the budget process, the budget article, rather than in the Board of Estimates article, which makes all the more sense if we're talking also later about the possibility of changing or eliminating the Board of Estimates or things like that. Does that seem reasonable to everybody as an approach here, that we establish a separate article, just the budget article?
Yes.
Yes, it seems a little cleaner that way rather than just having it in multiple spaces. I know one thing we'll have to address is what it looks like when we excise a portion of the charter and what that looks like too, as we lump out a portion of it.
Yeah, what number are we going to give to the budget article?
Just got to enumerate everything.
This is this is Ross's job.
Easy part.
Yeah, that's the easy part. So that said, when it comes to special funds, there is in this, I would say, very broad language on the Board of Estimates, this statement: the Board of Estimates shall formulate and execute the fiscal policy of the city. This is an incredibly broad statement. And that, along with a couple of other things that I identified, and I have them in notes in a Word document that I've been kind of compiling, but that isn't really in shape for distribution yet, are a couple of other things that I believe if we tweak just a couple of things, we make it so that special funds or special segregating of sources of revenue to specific purposes, like the idea of a parking benefits district, can be done without having to create a new special fund in the charter explicitly. It's perfectly normal to create special funds in other legislative bodies without it. The state, I don't think, has to go and amend the Maryland Constitution anytime they want to segregate specific funds for specific purposes, right? I just read a bill today that's been introduced by the governor's office this session that says that proposes an expansion of the powers of the use of automated camera enforcement on certain kinds of roads. And it says specifically that, like, money from this goes into this special fund for this special purpose that doesn't have to be created in the state constitution.
Just one point of clarification there, though. Just because that's in an ordinance, that there's money in there in the state level for a fund, the governor still has to fund it. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually going to get funded.
Right.
Because the budget is still the budget and they have to include that in the budget, but the governor doesn't have to fund it.
Right. But in this case, what we're talking about is, like, if we have a special fund and we say this specific dedicated source of revenue
Yeah,
goes toward
Right.
this specific purpose,
that's right.
we can't do that right now. But if we tweak just a little bit of language about the budgetary authority that we have, we can do that without it having to go through a charter amendment.
Right. But I because you were using an example from the state, just to clarify that they don't have to fund that. So what we want to do is put in exactly what you said, which is, here's the dedicated funding source.
Right.
So that we know that it's going to get funded.
Right. So I think there's some minor tweaks there's some things as we move this budget language from the Board of Estimates article into a new article on the budget. There are a couple of tweaks that can be made to that in order to straighten out this budgetary special fund authority. We asked the Department of Legislative References and the Office of Council Services to talk about the proposal to combine. We don't have the Director of Legislative Reference here. We do have the Director of Council Services here. I'll just ask Nancy, did you and Ben meet about this, or did you have individual recommendations? And Jay, can she take your mic there?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ben Guthorn and I have had several conversations about the idea. One of the big concerns that we raised was, first was the question is what was the proposal trying to accomplish? And I know that there was an email from Councilwoman Ramos stating some of the things that she was interested in terms of what this combined organization or agency would do. Most of them are functions that are currently being done. It would just be doing them in a combined agency. And I know that one of the concerns is, at least from Council Services, the expanded ability to do more comprehensive bill analysis and fiscal notes. But combining us with DLR does not accomplish that. What accomplishes that is structural change in terms of our reliance on BBMR and other sources of information in the city, that without making other changes, it's just, to be flippant about it, changing letterhead. I mean, it really doesn't change our function. It does not change the ability for Council Services to get the information faster, and to have the time to do the kind of, I think, the DLS level analysis that I believe the Councilwoman was hoping that a combined agency could accomplish.
All right, I want to add. Roz, do you have anything from Ben?
Yes, he sent a statement for me to read, and I'm happy to clarify as much as I can. He said the proposed organizational change does not go far enough to secure the legislative, policy, and fiscal support that the council member seeks. Additional resources are required that go beyond reshuffling of the city's organizational chart. Before we create new letterhead, we first must invest, borrowed it, okay. We first must invest in partnership between the executive and legislative branch to ensure that both parties are working with the same facts. Access to unfiltered information about the operation of city government and transparency in thought processes would go a good deal further than amending sections 90 to 93 of Article 7. The legislature does not have the information it needs to effectively do its job. The proposed amendment does not address this issue.
All right, I want to.
So, Mr. Chair, let me just say one thing. This is my proposal, and I don't think I heard any of this until today. I think that when we're asking for opinions about one of our proposals, that they need to be brought before us so that I can be prepared to, in this case, have, a discussion so that we can come to a place where either we do this or we don't, but without having the notice prior to the meeting that this was going to happen and that they were going to write about this. I don't think that puts me in a good position.
I think I hear you. I think it's fine that we've got a response, though. We've got, what I'd like to do is actually ask for something to be sent to us. I think is a good next step. We've heard something.
But I also,
we've heard something back.
haven't actually had a sit-down conversation. Like I had an initial one like 2 or 3 years ago. I think we had an initial conversation. And then we had the proposal that I sent to them, which was 2 or 3 years old. And so we could actually have a more productive conversation about what each other's points are and to figure out how to move forward on this. What I'm hearing from them is 2 things. One, they need dollars, which I get. And secondly is
They need
that
what?
dollars,
Dollars.
money, people. And that's, a discussion to have. But also the second thing is just a relationship with the executive to be able to get the information that they need, which, we can work all of that. It's not cool to not have had their discussion with me prior to this meeting coming and then having a discussion about it.
I'm not necessarily saying we should have a deep discussion about it. I think we asked for some sort of response to come to us. They got a response to us.
I'll just say I take maybe a little bit of a different approach because I know when the proposals came up, one of the things I asked for was to get that response, and I think it's just important for us to have that dialogue. So, however it comes to us, as long as we get folks who are in good faith responding to us and trying to have that dialogue, I think it's fine.
Yeah, well, not knowing what the agenda was going to be today, other than we were going to talk through some of this, and so that I didn't know how far we were going to have the discussion. Didn't expect the discussion to happen on this today. This was my topic. I was prepared for the capital budget piece, not this piece. What I'm saying is that I would ask from the chair to put in place a protocol where if we're asking for information on somebody's proposal, that response comes back to the person who made that request so that we can actually have a dialogue about how this is going to work.
Well, maybe I'll take a different approach. Maybe add to that as opposed to just being to the one person, because I think, I can understand somebody raising an issue, right? But it's an issue that the whole committee was just like send it to everybody.
Send it to everybody ahead of time, sure.
I have a note from our last meeting that says Ben and Nancy to report on January 21st. So I made no expectation. I had no expectation that of anything except for we were going to come here today and we were going to hear from them. And so I think that we've got what we asked for. And if we want to make sure that people submit things to us in writing in advance of future meetings based on other requests, that's fine. I will ask that they be submitted to me as the chair and that they be distributed to all the members by our staff. It sounds like there is further discussion about this to be had. I am interested in a clearly written sense of what a desired set of outcomes would be. And to give not a speculative opportunity for DLR and OCS to respond, but to be clear about what kind of outcome. Hey Ben, how you doing? I didn't know you're I didn't. All right, so I want to move on from this one because I think that I want to get from Councilwoman Ramos. I want to, if there's a clear understanding of that you can express in writing about what you think could be better as an outcome. I always, want to try to understand desired end and potential means to end. I am gonna, we have a gentleman here who's Mr. Brockman. How you doing? We are going to be wrapping here today at 6:15 at the latest. I'm going to allow Mr. Brockman. You have a area of concern.
Before Mr. Brockman begins, I just want to give a little context. I'm glad he's here actually. So many of you know, so I chair the Education, Youth, and Older Adults Committee, and we had a hearing on the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund. Mr. Brockman did come and testify, and after his testimony, he also provided some additional comments or emails to the council members, and so that's what brought him here today. So again, thank you for being here.
So I will give Mr. Brockman a few minutes to share his concern right before we wrap. To move on here, redistricting reform, we decided this was a 2028 issue. Veto reform. This has a number of different elements to it. The time after a bill is passed within which the mayor has the opportunity to veto, the current language limiting the council's ability to override a veto only at regular meetings, not special meetings, things like this. Is a good example, like if the charter just said less. Yeah. It just, the city council can override a veto within this time frame or whatever, then, if it said less, we would be less kind of tied. And so there's a few things about this. There's also veto reform that is specific to the budget, right? Because the budget is a specific animal that has this other timeline where we're passing it right up against the end of the fiscal year, and like if a veto comes after the start of the fiscal year on the last day before the current fiscal year, then the council can't override that veto. So there's some stuff about that, but we did decide that it makes sense to try to move forward with veto reform for 2026.
With regard to budget and
I think both, yes.
and Mr. Chair, and then when will we actually start? Because I think we have a lot of these conversations in concept. Like when will we move towards more firm conversation around what these charter amendments actually are? And I'm asking that so that, like, as administration, like, we need to start preparing to obviously evaluate the different charter amendments that are on the table.
Yeah. So we've gone through all of the topics that have been put on the table in front of us. We've discussed them in some depth, but we didn't get through all of them in one meeting. We spent numerous hours kind of going sort of meticulously and giving things some air. And today we're going through these just to recap where we were in our kind of outcomes there, a sense of things. So I think with many of these, they are very narrow kind of concepts of change. So like if we say the issue is the number of meetings where that are the period the mayor has to veto something of the council's, which right now it's 3, and the proposal is that it be reduced to 2.
and allowing for, because right now it's 3, but only 3 regular meetings, and allowing for 2, and for the council to be able to schedule a special meeting that can count, right?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, they're pretty simple concepts here.
Mhm.
And so if we're saying that this is something we'd like to try to move forward with for 2026,
Mm.
you know, at this point, we've decided it's something that we probably want to move forward with 2026. And so this is the point, I think, where we just start saying, okay, well, we're going to have to start getting things drafted.
Yeah. And then I think that if we could get a document, right, that I think that this packet that we have is helpful, obviously, as we started the conversations.
Yeah.
But like as we're now a little bit further along, that we get another document that has the amendments, and then like, you know, whether it's a 26 thing or, you know, a 28 thing, but that we can actually start to have conversations around what's moving forward for 26.
Sure. I think that's probably in everybody's interest to have a consolidated shared written document that summarizes our takeaways here. Yeah, we'll work on that. Another budgetary issue is the timing of the budget delivery to the council. We had a summary of comparison to other jurisdictions at our first or second meeting, I think, that showed that we're like very late relative to when our fiscal year ends and begins, and when our budget is delivered to us by the Board of Estimates, or in other jurisdictions where their executive delivers the budget to their council. And the proposal is to move it a month earlier. I'll just say, to come back to the veto reform thing, Ethan and I had a discussion. Jeff, we discussed this a couple weeks ago, so I had a clear understanding. Right now, the budget language, it says the Board of Estimates will deliver the budget to the council no less than 45 days before the end of the fiscal year, and the council has 40 days to pass it. So we have to pass it by 5 days before the end of the fiscal year. It's got a funny thing in there that says if the budget is delivered to us on time, that within that 45-day thing, if it's delivered to us on time, then we have 40 days. It doesn't say anything like what happens if it's delivered to us a day late, a week late, a half a month late, right? It doesn't say anything like that. It just says if it's delivered to you on time, you got 40 days. But that you got to pass it by 5 days before the end of the fiscal year. And again, this raises the issue about like, okay, well then what if there's a veto on the last day? Like what happens? And there aren't any specific provisions about veto timing that are specific to the budget. And so as we think about the timing of the delivery of the budget to the council, I think we also have to think about the timing of the delivery of a veto once the council has passed the budget, and the time then necessarily, I think, that the council has to respond to that veto afterwards. Tyler, did you have a question or comment?
Quick question. I get this piece around the budget thing. What is the rationale around veto reform overall, though? Like, what's the need? Because I think that if this is purely about being able to essentially give the council more time on budget, right? I think we've had this conversation before. You just schedule enough meetings so that you have time to come back and do whatever you need to do when it comes to the budget. You schedule backwards so that you still have enough meetings to take action, as opposed to just overall veto, because this is just purely budget driven, right? I don't think that there's any.
There's an independent recommendation related to veto reform, independent of the budget. But I'm saying that like when we also talk about the budget, and the timing of the budget, it's also important for us to think about not just the delivery of the budget to the council, but what happens at the end of the council's process, which is possibility of a veto and carving out space for the possibility of a veto override. Like, we do have override power, but like when
So then, right. So, but what is the rationale for veto reform? Like, why is veto reform? Yeah, like I think those are the conversations that we got to have. Like, it's one thing to talk about, you know,
well,
this
we
is
did
the
we
topic.
did have conversation about this. We had conversation about this when the topic was presented.
Oh.
It came. I can ask Aaron DeGraff, right, to recap that again if we want to take 1 minute on this. But it is
Just
something we
1
already.
minute. I don't
we
remember
already
that.
did discuss this,
Okay.
and we already did decide that it was something that we want to take up.
So yes, Mr. Chair, just briefly, the last term when the council wanted to pursue veto reform, that came out of the redistricting back and forth, where the council had passed its own map, and then the mayor ultimately vetoed that, and they found themselves in a circumstance where there was still time for the map to go into effect, where the council could have, if the rules were changed or different, the council could have taken up a veto override vote. So in that particular case, there was somewhere around, I think, 10 days, but there were no regular meetings scheduled at the time where they could have taken up the veto override. So that spurred the conversation as to why we have the number of days that we had. And one of the things I know that came up in that conversation was that at the state level, the governor only has the two reciprocal meetings, or whatever the interval of time is that the governor has to veto. And so this brings it more in line with that, but also just more globally gives the council more flexibility to consider a veto override, so that, again, as the chair noted, that it's down to 2 meetings for the mayor to consider it, and that the council can consider an override vote at a special meeting, not just limited to those regular meetings that are promulgated at the beginning of the calendar year.
So this convention, like you pointed to, Tyler, is the need to like gauge the timing of your actions by counting back from some future date and things like that is only it's purely a convention driven by the fact that the charter already goes to this extreme step of specifying that action can only be taken at a regular meeting. The inclusion of the word regular is that one word is driving this whole process here, where if it didn't say regular, it doesn't have to say regular or special. It just doesn't have to, it just needs to not say regular. And then it allows the council to just have more liberty to take action that it's entitled to take. It's entitled to override a veto. It's just not, it's just like being tied up.
Okay. And then last thing on this, because I know you got to move on. But so then if you're going to change the word from regular to just meeting, then what is the justification? Like, why are we changing the number? Like, why does the number matter in that case?
Well, it's two separate things. There's number of meetings within which the mayor has to deliver the veto to the council. That's 3 right now, and the proposal is to drop that down to 2.
2 meetings to deliver the veto.
Mm-hmm.
And then how many to take?
And then for the council to be able to take it up at a meeting after that. Right now we have this very cockamamie kind of standard of the council can take action between not fewer than 5 days after a veto has been delivered, but not more than 20 days after it has been delivered. And delivered means the day that we have a council meeting and it is recorded in the record that we have received the veto on the day of that council meeting. And then there's this carve out that says, but if there is no council meeting within that 5 to 20 days, then the council can take up a veto at its next meeting after the 20th day, at which point you're saying, okay, so I could take it up on the 7th day if there's a council meeting on the 7th day. If there's a meeting not on the 7th day, but there's one on the 14th day afterward, I can take it up on that. If there's one on the 7th day and the 14th day, I could take it up on either of them. And if there's not one on the 7th or the 14th day, but there is one on the 21st day, then I can take it up on the 21st day. And so I've got all of this liberty around which I can take these actions in this like multi-week time frame, but like only on this like weird, rigorous framework of when regular council meetings happen to take place, when instead we could simply say the council can override a veto within X number of days of its delivery. That's it. It can be that much simpler.
And what?
Just any meeting, at any meeting within X number of days.
And how many days will it be?
I don't know. Right now it's between 5 and 20, but like it says, again, if there's no council meeting between the 5th and 20th day, then it can take it up at its next meeting. Well, what if it's not until the 45th day after it's been delivered? What if it's not until the 75th day after it's been delivered? What if the council just decides that it's not holding any meetings for 3 months straight? It doesn't matter how long it is. If there's no meeting between the 5th and 20th day, the council can take up that veto at whatever date in the future it holds its next meeting.
So council can come back a year later and
If it doesn't hold any meetings, we are mandated to have one meeting.
Let me say this, because I think we're probably getting a little bit off track. I think the main point is that there is a process that is at least clear and allows for some regularity.
Right.
And so, yes, no, it's not going to be a year, right? But I think there has to be something to say, okay, maybe it's 20 days, maybe it's a meeting. But again, that it isn't this back and forth game that puts the council in a position where they have to, contort themselves to figure out a way to pass a bill or to veto this legislation. So I think, and I think the last piece I'll say is that I think with a lot of these proposals, whether we're talking about BOE, if we're talking about council services, if we're talking about even veto, we may not have the direct answer now, but this is part of the conversation about how we get there, right? And there's an answer. We're not quite there yet, but we know there's something better than what we have now.
Yeah. Okay. So veto stuff, timing of budget delivery to council.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to add to the discussion around the timing of the budget.
Mhm.
I had a discussion with the budget director who reminded me that the reason why we have the budget outline, the process the way that we do now is simply because of the Board of Estimates. So if we wanted to move the thing back, it should not have to be because they have to deliver a preliminary budget to the Board of Estimates. The preliminary budget could be done when we get the preliminary budget as opposed to the Board of Estimates. Okay, so the only reason why we get it so late is because they have to do a preliminary budget to the Board of Estimates that has to be approved. So one thing to think about when we think about the timing is this issue of the Board of Estimates, right? It's all related.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier. I mean, it's just the existence of the Board of Estimates touches on so many
All of
different
it.
things.
It touches on all of it.
It is particularly difficult to separate budget and Board of Estimates
Correct.
things. So long as the Board of Estimates exists, whatever, like if you take the budget proposal away from the Board of Estimates, for example, okay, what's left with the Board of Estimates at that point? Not much. It's the contracts, which is like, oh, well, there's an equal proper, there's a reasonable proposal here. The contracts just come through the council, whatever. It's an albatross, as the council president noted earlier.
I just wanted to make the point that it's not just about the timing, it's about the mechanism of delivering a preliminary budget to the Board of Estimates. That is the obstacle.
I'm going to go to Aaron real quick and then I'll move on.
Just a quick note that one of the other points that the Department of Finance made to us when I first worked on this a couple of years ago was that it wasn't just about the Board of Estimates, but also about the General Assembly session and getting state budget allocations from their process.
I don't want to go
So
back and forth about
that,
this.
I'm not going back and forth. Just wanted that was the thing that they said and may come back up. Is all.
Right. We've heard this before. We've also looked at other jurisdictions in Maryland who operate on the same timeline
Totally
as the General Assembly.
Right.
And they have the
They
budget
even
a
pass
month
their
earlier
budget
than
before the
us.
General Assembly is finished.
Okay. So, revenue certification schedule. Every discussion we had about this, we basically went, what is revenue certification? And every takeaway was like, actually, it sounds a lot more like projection would be a much more appropriate term here. We don't really have a sense. We didn't walk away from any of our previous discussions with the sense that this is something that we're ready to like move forward on. Audit timing requirements. After the close of each fiscal year, the administration must submit the annual comprehensive financial report to the City Council and Board of Estimates before December 31st of that year. The note that I made here was to add this to the new proposed budget article. I'll also note, though, that when it comes to audit, I guess this is a different type of auditing than what the biennial audits commission does. So this would be perhaps more sensible to have in the charter, separate from the discussion we've had about biennial audits as something that can be moved into code. So that's something that can be noted in our budget section. Minor privileges reform. This is the only thing that we discussed that touches on Article 8 of the charter, which is the franchises article. The franchises article is one of the oldest in the charter. It is very obviously written in a much more prose fashion than the rest of the charter. Ethan, do you want to say anything about our very quick review of this franchises article? I'm relying on a very good staff here to help think through a lot of stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I recall, like we discussed, this is a particularly outdated section that's relatively clear from how it's structured. Likewise, I think the Tervala report, as I can best recall, recommends removing a lot of this section and moving it to code. This is also obviously related to the BOE to a certain extent.
Yeah, the big thing here was that like any minor privilege needs to go to the Board of Estimates. That's just totally nuts. It doesn't make any sense to give a general authority over the use of public streets to the Department of Transportation, the transportation director, but then say this one thing that uses public right of way has to go to the Board of Estimates when there are perfectly reasonable ways of permitting things. We already permit contractors to go out and do work in the street. Yeah, conditional right ordinance. So I'll say for the work that I've been putting in between our meetings here and today, between meetings here so far, my work has been to pore over Articles 6 and most of Article 7 at this point, and so I haven't gone into Article 8 to see where I think things should be moved around. But that minor privilege thing is kind of an easy thing to deal with. It's a question for me. If we're touching Article 8, is that the only thing that we want to touch in Article 8? And that's kind of the question that I need to delve into. It's one of the articles of the charter that I've read the least. But generally, we all came away going, the minor privilege thing needs to be addressed. And so I'm expecting that this is something that we can bring forth for 2026. Conditional budget authority. This is again, as we move budget stuff from the Board of Estimates article to its own article, this is something that requires a couple of tweaks to what exists today in Article 6 as Section 9A, and in Section 7B3 is where I noted a couple of concerning phrases. Procurement reform. This is in the Board of Estimates article. This is something we're just going to take out and move over to ordinance. Biennial audit reform. This, I know we can laugh when we say things as ham-fisted as this should be really easy to have drafted, but this one is just a repeal. I mean, if we just we want to move biennial audits to the code, this is as simple as a repeal of that section, those subsections, and there doesn't seem to be any need to delay on that. It's but it's something that requires some public discussion of why we want to do this and how we move forward with it. Capital budget reform. We have a multi-page document from Councilwoman Ramos on this. Can we come back to it in just a second? I'm just going to touch on these other ones because I think you've got some in-depth stuff to go over there. Closeout supplemental reform. Okay, so I had a number of discussions about this issue of closeout supplemental reform, and it kind of relates to the thing about conditional budget authority, a conditional release of funds, in that both things raise the question of who is giving the okay for money to be spent on a day-to-day basis, right? So if we say the council has conditional authority to conditionally release funds or allow for only conditional release of funds, it raises the question of who determines when the condition has been met. At the state level, that determination is made by the state treasurer, who is a representative of the legislative branch. The legislative branch says, sure, this state agency can have, $300 million in this budget, but 100,000 of it can't be released to this one office unless somebody gives us this information first. And the treasurer is there to go, did we get the information? If not, then that agency can't have that money yet. But here, when we don't have a treasurer to whom the purse holders of government must respond or must get the okay from, and when the finance department is that purse holder and they are within the executive branch, not the legislative branch, then when these legislative branch conditions are set, we can't really do anything if the legislative branch says, well, we think that the condition was met, so we're releasing the fund. I say this in a kind of performative, exaggerative way, but it makes the point. Similar, the issue of closeout supplemental reform comes from the year after year outcome of an agency being allowed to freely spend more than what was authorized to them in the budget, despite the fact that it says that money can move around within an agency by a Board of Estimates memo, but can't move from one agency to another without a supplemental bill being passed first, not after the fact, first. You can't spend money that hasn't been appropriated to you, but that doesn't stop it from happening every single year. Agencies are just permitted to spend more than what was budgeted to them because somebody thinks, we'll get a supplemental bill in after the fact. And that's just not how this is supposed to work. That's not legal. But it brings us back to the question of like, who is holding the purse strings and allowing that to happen? And again, that's not right now. That's the finance department within the executive branch, and I don't know how you say stop sending us these supplementals after the fact, except to say stop sending these supplementals to us after the fact, because it's not legal to ask to spend this money without having asked us beforehand. So I don't really know what the reform is there, unless the reform is somebody other than the finance department in the executive branch holds the purse strings. I don't know what, and so I don't think that we're ready to put any other proposal.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would say that if we move the timing of the budget to earlier, then there may be some information to the point that Aaron made, and that sometimes we hear from finance, we may have to do supplementals if there's stuff that comes in from the General Assembly that we didn't have time to put in or something like that, right? Like if we do the timing right, we should be able to have the General Assembly end and then be able to put in whatever it is in an amendment, right? We should be able to do that. But there may be some other things that come after that we need to figure out. So I would just sort of maybe think about the supplemental piece relative to the timing of the budget. And then the other piece is I get that we've been the practice of finance right at the moment, which is a change from before, it was to take out from the budget that we pass any grants that we don't know about, right? That are so that we're passing a budget with real money, not pretend money, not maybe future money, that kind of thing, right? So we need to have supplementals to be able to accept those grants as they come in, is my understanding as well. So I think we need to just think about all of that. And the last point is, I understand the point about we shouldn't be overspending, and that's why we have to do closeout supplementals. So we should think about that. But I'd much rather have a public process with supplementals than just have this shadow, like going in and out, transferring between funds and between agencies without public input about it, or at least public knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why the supplemental is supposed to come before the money is spent, not after. It's one thing to say, we get the budget proposal, we pass the budget, or sometime in the passage of the budget, the state allocates money, and maybe sometime after the passage of the budget, we have to pass a supplemental in order to accept and allocate additional state funds that we hadn't incorporated in the original budget. But it's, when's that going to come? We're going to pass the budget before July 1st, and we're going to get these supplementals then, let's just say reasonably August 1st, and we're going to pass them in September. The real issue here is that when it comes to be March and the Budget Bureau is going, this is the lump of money that was allocated to DOT, and this is the lump of money that was allocated to Rec and Parks, and one of them is burning faster than will sustain for the full duration that money was supposed to serve for. They should know that by February. They should know that by March and be sending us the supplemental then, not in June or July, June, saying, oh, we didn't do this sooner, so we just let them spend money that wasn't appropriated to them. here's the supplemental to clean up our mess after the fact. Like they should know sooner. But if the person who's allowing that money to be spent is somebody that I don't know how to change that other than to change the person who is allowing the money to be spent. So I don't know how we reform that if it's not a structural change to how money is handled. If it's only we don't like the disrespect of being told to clean this thing up when we weren't asked in the first place that the money could be spent, all we can do is we can refuse to pass supplementals after the fact if we want, and that's that. Split rate taxation enabling, not a charter thing. We all kind of concluded that. Outside council reform, not ready for prime time. So if it were ever to happen, it's not a 2026 thing. Term limits, loads of interest in this, not a 2026 thing. Needs a lot of education on that.
Mr. Chair, I don't think we actually came to a conclusion about that because I'm one to try to do it immediately, so that we can get it on the ballot and done. And well, I think the chairman's proposal is to do it, in 2028, at our next election.
My takeaway from our conversation was that you were the only committee member who thought that we should.
We didn't have a vote. If you want to make a motion, we can vote.
I got an informal sense here that I thought that
I think we need to do it sooner. I think we need to do it 2026.
Let's have some discussion on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I
also don't think that there's necessarily agreement about what repeal of term limits looks like.
That's what I was gonna say, is that I'm happy to have this in 2026, but I think there needs to be a discussion amongst the council about what this change actually looks like.
Well, in my mind, I think we talked about this, that there's really there's three options. Okay. One is just reform it, like delete it, just delete that part of the charter and where all the other references to the other, just delete it and it's done. The second one was to come up with another proposal, right? So let's say, I'm just making this up. I'm not a fan of this, but I'm just making it up. If it was the will of the council or somebody wants to put in a bill that says, or a charter amendment that says, okay, we're going to have term limits, but we're going to do it differently. And it would be, 3 terms and the staggered, let's just say. That would obviously be something that we'd have to discuss. But so it's just two options.
Yeah. So I think personally, my interest is more in line with the second one. Well, no, is not a total repeal. And so this is a
repeal.
And I know that, and I know there
That's
is
the need for discussion.
I know multiple members on multiple sides of this of this council that are on both sides. So I don't have any issues having this 2026, but I think it's a political conversation amongst the members to figure out how everyone feels about this. But I have no concern about doing this in 20. I think it actually does make more sense to do it now. Like I don't see any reason to wait, but that would be where I'm coming from here.
Yes.
I'll just say we're all members of the committee. One thing I will just say, I think it's important for the public to be engaged in this process too. The conversation thus far has been conversation amongst the council, and as productive as that can be, I think it's important to have members of the public be engaged in that process as we are representing the public.
And I'll say this, on this topic more than any other we have discussed, because this is the thing that just so many people gravitate toward as a panacea solution for all of their dissatisfaction with city government. That it has widespread support actually to some degree, and that's how it was able to pass in the first place. We collected a bunch of petition signatures. A lot of people signed about. Hold on, please. And it came to the voters, and it was already passed once by voters, and all of that happened without any public discourse about why term limits are bad public policy, particularly for legislative roles. It was such a crude axe
Right.
that it didn't even distinguish between legislative roles and the executive or even the comptroller. But like, what's wrong with a comptroller watching the dollars in and out for an extended period? Like, it doesn't make any sense. I can see all the, there's like all this justification around executive branch, but there's all this research about legislative that term limits being bad for public interest that was never discussed in the public sphere, and which there's so much opportunity to discuss. And I think out of the utmost respect for the voters of this city, that needs to be given a deep level of consideration, and that it's simply a matter of educating and having earnest conversation about like why people might think term limits are a solution for something else, and like then say, but like, let's actually just try to solve that something else that drove you to want term limits, as you're just like, I'm throwing my hands up with this government, get rid of all these bums. I think that deserves so much effort and public discourse that I do not think that we have the level of capacity to cover that in the depth that one topic deserves, separate from everything else that we need to do here.
All right. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just agree with you on the point of that, yes, people did vote in support, but I think a lot of it came without knowing the consequence and without having the conversation, right? And I think that conversation is important. It needs to be had. And as I continue to have it with folks, like they're like, oh, I didn't think about that and didn't see it. Like they might look at what would come about, but not the entire consequence, which will come from it. And, people aren't up in arms now because people don't have to face that consequence yet. And I think it's partly on our responsibility to kind of have that conversation of what the back end will look like and move forward. So, yeah, I agree with you on that part.
Mr. Chair, I would just say that the reason that all came about was somebody who we know is, just trying to mess up our city, and basically went up to people on grocery stores and saying, hey, do you want us to spend less tax money? Yes. Here. Completely not doing the right thing by saying, actually understanding what this was, right? And we absolutely got caught off guard. We were like, oh, this is on the ballot. We didn't know, right? So I get that we are responsible. We're partially responsible for what happened. Totally get it. However, I think that there's enough discussion, and frankly, we need to have the discussion, not necessarily I'm all for transparency and I want to have the discussion. The issue is heated enough that if we even open it up, people will have a discussion about it, okay? And it will happen in the next, few months if we wanted it to. And I think that we absolutely need to have the discussion, but I also know that we have to take action. At least people in my district are asking that we take action immediately, because we want to, first of all, say a big, middle finger to the guy who did this, but also that, residents know that elections are actually the term limits, and that is something that's very important.
One point I'll say before we wrap this up. So I hear where everybody's coming from. This is where I think we land. So we have this process, and I think we can start this conversation now. I can imagine this conversation lasting for months. I think we do have time, given that when term limits actually kick in. So I don't think it's urgent that we do it in the next 3 months to actually get something passed, but I think us starting the conversation now is very key. So I think the time is ripe to have the conversation. What we come to has to be a deliberative process. And let me be very frank about this. What you do not want it to look like is a self-dealing situation amongst the council to say citizens of Baltimore, however they came to that decision. So again, someone came up to me with a ballot or a petition. So I understand all that, but we do want to err on the side of a good faith effort and understanding that yes, there's been a decision made, whether we agree with it or not, but to give ample time for us to have a robust conversation to the point that Mr. Chair made, that there was really no conversation. It was like, do you like it? Do you think it's a good idea? We should do it. And I think it was very rushed. Let's not be rushed this time and have a very deliberative process, not only amongst ourselves in this room, but also amongst the constituents of Baltimore. So they're very well aware of what we're trying to do, what the issues are, where the challenges are, and what the possibilities could be.
Yeah, real quick.
Just to the virtue of having a good public dialogue on this, obviously the 2024 election had an example where the same individual who funded the previous one, right, funded an initiative that did get on the ballot. And because there was widespread, and I'm not saying there for sure is, but there was in that case widespread agreement amongst all the council members, kind of the whole, like all the elected folks in the city, right? Like it became the first ballot measure to lose in 20 years, right? So I think that just the testament to like, we can do public dialogue, like we can do this stuff, right? And so I think that's the right step.
And I would note that Councilman Blanchard is an example of term limits.
That's right. Okay, hold on.
What I'm
Look,
saying,
if
you understand what I'm saying, that
if this
the entity that
committee-
you reference
if
cannot
this
beat this
committee
young man.
didn't want to take up any other measures, right? If this committee didn't want to make any other recommendations, I would feel like we would have the capacity to lead the educational effort that I think is needed for term limits alone. But if we want to do anything else, then I think that term limits needs more time to be given to its own dedicated education effort. And I would feel very, very differently about 2026 being the year to repeal term limits if it were a public initiated ballot measure than if it were coming oriented from us. If it's coming from us, there is so much the specter of self-dealing that without a rigorous effort at outreach and education about why term limits are really harmful to public interest, that we run too great a risk of it coming back in our face. And so, you know, and I think that right here on January 21st, today, we do not have agreement about what this repeal or change would even look like if it were something passing through the council. And so, like other things in this list of proposed topics, it is not ready for prime time.
I would just add, though, that I think it looks worse if we do this on our own election year.
I don't.
I do. I
What-
think it looks much worse if it's our own election year.
It won't matter.
It doesn't affect anybody until 2032. And so if it's taken up in 2028, then anybody who's elected in 2028, if the thing passes, then they can continue to serve potentially after 2032. And if it doesn't pass in 2028, then 2028 is their last year. They're term limited, and that's all there is to it. Like it doesn't affect the 2028 to 2032 term in any way. And so I don't think that there's any relationship between it being on the ballot in 2028. We have 9 minutes before that I want to dedicate to first to the capital budget, and then I want to go to Mr. Brockman. So I want to discuss this capital budget thing because Councilwoman Ramos put the effort in with her staff to prepare a document that was distributed to us, and I want to respect that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. I just wanted to present it. We can have the discussion about it later if you'd like.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And that's totally fine with me. I think it's going to take a while to absorb anyway, to read everything. But members, I put this together basically trying as our last conversation about, well, what do other cities do about their capital budget? So all this is a compilation of data and information from Baltimore County, Howard County, Montgomery County, Harford County, Madison, Wisconsin, and Pittsburgh, PA. There's lots of other cities we can go with, but I thought this would be a good sample. We can always look at other cities. So you'll note, I mean, the first page is really just a big summary. All
And
of
the table of contents. So wonderful. Thank you.
And then this is all in note form. It's not like narrative. So some of it is copy and pasted. Some of it is direct reference from their codes about what each jurisdiction does. The real fun part about this is at the very end, which is, as those of you know who've served with me before, the chart. Okay? The chart. So the chart is the summary, and then you can get all the good stuff in the rest of it. Okay? And so I'll go over the chart, and then we can go over, some of the other things. And if the committee has other information you'd like me and my staff to look into, I'm happy to do that. So if you just flip to the last page, which is the chart, you'll see on the top line is the topics that we cover, and then Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Howard, et cetera. And on that line, it says charter code. We did look into whether or not a lot of the process of the budget in each jurisdiction is in the code or in their charter. Okay. So the majority, so some of them are just in the code. They have broad principles in the charter, but it's outlined in the code. I thought that would be interesting. Baltimore County and Baltimore City are the only jurisdictions that we looked at that have the capital and the operating in one ordinance. Every other city that we looked at has the capital separate from the operating, okay, which is one of my proposals, is to make sure that that is separate so that we end up talking about 4 ordinances during budget as opposed to 3. Okay, because the capital budget is folded in to our operating, to the ordinance of estimates. So I would want to do that separately. What was interesting was that several of these jurisdictions actually had spending affordability boards that looked at what are the bonds that we're floating and what can we afford and what are the topics and all of that we are going to be looking at. In Montgomery County, their spending affordability actually has city council members on that particular board. Now in Baltimore City, our capital budget starts with work that the Planning Commission does. And in Pittsburgh, they have something similar called the Capital Facilitation Committee that starts it, but there's city council members on that board. And in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Howard County, we do the planning commissions or planning boards process. But in Montgomery, Harford, and Madison, Wisconsin, there are they don't have a planning board. It starts with recommendations to the city council, and they have a process by which to look at the capital needs of every agency. Okay. Which is, something that that we should discuss at some other point. Then when is the budget introduced? This goes back to the discussion that we had before. And you can see all of these have budgets introduced way earlier than we do. And as a matter of fact, in Montgomery County, they start their capital budget so early that they introduce it in January. And then have a council process to be able to get everything done. And then Wisconsin and Pittsburgh. The reason I chose Madison is our budget director is from Madison. So she would be able to educate us a little bit more about that city that she worked in. She's not from there, but she worked in that. So if we had any questions, that would be something. Anyway, their fiscal years are the calendar year. So that's why these numbers are different in terms of when those budgets have to be passed. And then do the city council have hearings, or the county council have hearings on the capital budget? Every single jurisdiction has hearings on the capital budget except for us. Okay. We are not precluded from doing so in our charter, but it is something that I'd like to have happen. And then the last column is when does their budget need to be approved by? And you'll note those early dates. So that's an overview of some of the information. There's a lot more specifics within the body of the document that we can discuss at another time. And I can put a proposal together based on this, but I thought it would be interesting, given our discussion at the last meeting, to at least look at what other cities and jurisdictions in Maryland are doing relative to the capital budget.
I'm interested to see what a proposal would look like.
Sure.
I'll note, yeah, like you said, it's not that we're precluded from holding hearings on the capital budget. It just hasn't generally been done. If the city council wants to do that, we can do that. The other thing I noted is that, you know, even in Pittsburgh, whereas the Capital Program Facilitation Committee, it's advisory, like our planning commission is. And theirs happens to have 2 members of the city council. Ours has 1. And it seems like Madison is really the only one that doesn't have either like a spending affordability board or a planning commission, that it's just entirely in the council's hands. So that seems to actually be an outlier kind of circumstance, that there isn't some at least advisory board outside of the legislative body. But I think the point is well taken about there being perhaps some merit to having separate ordinances for an operating budget and a capital budget. I'd be equally interested to, you know, as interested as I am in an outline of the proposal of changes you might make. I'd be equally interested to hear from the finance director as to why they think that the integration of the two, as opposed to having separate ordinances, is of, you know, importance. Anything else on this real quick before we go to Mr. Brockman? I'm trying to wrap up here.
I'll just briefly say I liked what the council president was saying at the beginning about the whole National League of Cities getting involved in all this, and I'm pretty curious to hear. I know the mayor came out at the beginning of the term and saying he supported the abolition of the Board of Estimates in general, which obviously has a bunch of follow-on questions. But I would be really interested to hear where the mayor's office feels about these like general, what they think, not just in response to a proposed set of reforms, but what they're thinking about as a proposed set of reforms.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll have a proposal for you.
You're
Yeah.
welcome. Mr. Brockman, I'll give you 2 minutes to kind of tell us what you're about, and then we'll go from there.
Mr. Chair, honorable council members, thank you so much for their time. I appreciate it very much. Yes. My name is Minister Eric Brockman. I am the founder and chairman of Focus on Communities United for Success. And my pastor always told me, stick to the point when they give you a few minutes to speak. So I'm going to stick to the point. What I'm going to talk to you about tonight is about intent, voter intent. In 2016, the voters passed a bill to a referendum to establish the Children and Youth Fund. And that fund was established. And then in 2020, I believe it was the council passed a bill to try to administer that fund through a third-party entity called the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund. So I believe that was not the voters' intent. And I asked, I don't know what the level of effort is, but I believe that this bill needs to go back to the voters to ask them what their intent was. Was their intent to establish a private entity to manage a $16 million taxpayer fund with very little oversight? I have here Bill 25011, the latest update that was given to us yesterday at a meeting. And I've reviewed this bill, and I found it to be woefully inadequate. It does not address the voter intent. Also, I'm concerned regarding the news reports about how the Children Fund's money has been spent, and the OIG report. Trust me, I've read it word for word, verbatim. The issue that I have is that, one, lack of oversight, the woefulness of this bill to implement oversight. And the third thing I would like to say is that if this fund is moved back and the voters were to move this fund back under the city management, all the SOPs, the KPIs, all of that would be established already. Rules and regulations would be established already, and you would have to worry about leadership of BCYF taking trips worth $300,000. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if I want to ask you to wrap it up here.
Okay,
but I want to make sure that I have a. You started by saying your pastor always says,
Yeah, stick to the point. I'm gonna stick to the point.
Is the
So
point,
my
the
last
point
point
here-
is to
Yes,
get to have placed on the ballot the voters referendum as to moving the fund back under city control.
Got it. So the main point here, the main takeaway is having the fund administered in-house directly by city government officials, as opposed to outsourcing any sort of third-party administration. of it.
Yes,
That's
right.
the nut of it.
Yeah, it could be under the Department of Social Services or whatever. Even
As
the
it turns out,
Department
we
of,
don't have one of those,
You don't?
and despite there being something in the charter
Oh,
that we're
okay.
gonna make.
Well, we
the-
do have
make the play to repeal here.
the children and family success,
Yeah,
right?
got you. Okay.
Okay. All right. I'll
Thank
leave you
you,
all
sir.
alone, and I'll stop sending you all emails. I said what I wanted to say, and I gave you my document. If you just read the first paragraph, you'll see what it's all about. Thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate it. I'm very honored.
Thank you.
I'm very
Appreciate you
honored.
just
Thank you.
sticking out here so we could give you this time at the end of our meeting here.
All right.
Okay, so next moves here. We've got upcoming community sessions starting at the end of next month. Today's January 21st. The first of these sessions is February 26th. Ethan, when's our next meeting of the committee? Between now and whenever our next meeting of the committee is, we're going to work on that document that Tylor asked for. That's February 4th is our next meeting. And Tylor did ask for like a kind of a summary of like the topics that we've considered and where they stand or what we want to do with them. That's fine. We'll work on that. I'll work with Ethan on that. I will also, from this understanding, look, it's informal, right? We didn't take any votes on anything, but I think we have a shared understanding generally of everything that we've just gone through, right? With each of these topics, that certain ones are things that will go into this measure around the budget, and that means that it happens in the process of moving the budget from Board of Estimates to its own article. So there's like multiple overlapping things there. Taking these and saying these several ones consolidate into this one bill draft that might cover 5 or 6 of these different topics. And I didn't go into the thoughts about Article 7, but I want to go through Article 7 and try to clean up and simplify what's in Article 7, remove things that don't need to be in there, like the Department of Social Services and the Department of Education, which don't exist anymore. There's a lot of repetitive language that says the same things about the establishment of each department and their head and how they're appointed and that their salaries are accounted for in the ordinance of estimates. It doesn't make sense to state the same thing 15 different times for 15 different agencies when you can just define that an agency has a head and that their salary exists and that they're appointed and that they have a deputy and that there's a list of agencies that exist. We can dramatically simplify Article 7. Haven't started going through Article 8, like I said, but I take it as my kind of role here to work with our various agency staff, our committee staff, to try to consolidate the things that we've discussed into something that's actionable as kind of a next step to ask DLR to start drafting things. But I do want to remain cognizant of, we have these upcoming public sessions happening. On the one hand, I don't want to get ahead of that too far because I don't want to preclude other people's input from those sessions from bearing on what we ultimately recommend here, but also recognizing that if we wait until March 17th, after the last of these 5 sessions, to begin the process of trying to draft up these things that we have some reasonably educated sense of, like, this is the stuff that we want to go forward with, then we're too late. We're not going to be able to get anything ready. So we need to get something moving along. So my work here, my role I take as just trying to usher these next steps along from now to the next meeting.
Mr. Chair, could you come up with a very all caps initial draft list of, like, we'd be looking at, here's what we're looking at doing in 26, here's what we're looking at, and like updated more than obviously what we have there.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's essentially what I want to try to accomplish and what Tyler is asking for. Give us a strong, like, recap overview. I'm going from the same PowerPoint slides that we've had since the first meeting. And I think we're at a place now where we can turn this into something much more comprehensive.
Mr. Chair, what's the timing of what the president talked about relative to the NCL and Board of Estimates?
Unclear. I know that the mayor, the president, and the controller had a meeting with NCL last week, I think, an NLC last week. Not sure when their next meeting is, but
because it sounds to me like a lot of our work that we've just talked about is about budget, which is about the Board of Estimates, which is about, do you know what I mean? So when we think about sort of timing this out, especially if we're going to end up doing budget and Board of Estimates and all of that in 28, because we're running out of time now, then that includes what we just talked about. So I think we need to really look at that timing.
Yep. Okay.
Quick question, Mr. Chair. This document you have electronically that we can get it, and we need to send out. That would be
the council president's staff worked that up. Tijani put that together.
Yeah.
Shamoya printed them, I think, and brought them here for us. So we'll get that.
And just one other thing. When you spoke about which ones may be able to be packaged together while you was going over the different amendments, there was a pattern of, like, moving things out of the charter and into the code. I think maybe though that might be a good start of packaging some together that kind of all just moving from out the charter into the code, and that may be one package of such things to start with. I'm not sure. Yeah,
I think, well,
I'm not sure if that's a way to categorize it.
We have single subject with legislation, but we have a much broader range of ability to change things with the charter. It's a little less rigorous.
No, I understand. I just think that we can't put in, like, anything we take out of the charter, we can't just put in one piece of legislation. We have to do several.
Oh, yeah, with the legislative stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I got to get running here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
February 4th. Yeah.